All right, everyone. It is the top of the hour. Welcome to Monday, Maddie's Community Conversations. I am one of your co-hosts, Jose Ocaño, founder and CEO of Hatching, and I am delighted to be co-hosting here with my pal, Christina Lee. Christina, good morning. How are you?
Hello, hello. Good afternoon on the East Coast here. Hello, everybody. My name is Christina Lee, and I'm the founder and principal of Stella Farmer Strategies. And I'm also very excited to be here. And we have great speakers. We have an awesome presentation. But before we jump into that, we always have to start off our community conversations with our question of the day. So today's question is, do you have anybody in your community who has been affected by housing issues due to an animal in the home? So that could be a landlord trying to get their tenant out because they have a dog of a certain breed, or they're not allowed to have pets, or whatever it is. So be really curious to know if you have anyone in your community who has been affected by housing issues due to having an animal in the home.
Well,
Yep,
people put some of
definitely.
those in the chat. Christina, what about you? Like, especially with your behavior backgrounds, I wonder like what you have seen, in your career.
Oh, so much. I would say, well, for me, I lived for 11 years in my apartment in Queens. We weren't allowed to have pets at all. Um, so I really wanted a dog, but I couldn't get one. And so it was really difficult for me. And I've heard so many stories from my community members of, oh, I can't have a pit bull in this apartment building. Oh, don't list the breed when they're adopting the dog. Don't list this breed as a pit bull because then I'm not going to be able to have them. But if you list them as like a mix or a lab mix, like then it's okay. So I've definitely heard lots of stories about that.
Yeah. And we're seeing in the chat too, like from people saying they experience these kinds of things from their work and the kind of the position they held to people saying, my sister, my family is experiencing this. So we see that there is this intersection of like it's affecting those of us personally who have family members, friends, community members, and through the work that we do. Really important question. And it tees up for what we are going to talk about today. And so I know as people continue to drop in their answers to the question of the day, we want to encourage people to also, let us know who you are, where you're zooming in from. This is a great platform to make connections and build community. The conversation always continues on the forum, so make sure to check us out there after the call. And so we're going to be doing national updates similarly as we have been the last few weeks. So if you have a national update, please just drop that in the chat so that we can see. And I'm gonna toss it over to Allison, who has one national update for us to share on the Zoom. Allison.
Good morning, good afternoon, everybody, wherever you are. I don't know if anybody on the call today has attended our past Camp Maddie behavior or Camp Maddie foster webinars. They're 4 hours, half day. Actually, behavior was 2 days. But we're going to do another one coming up November 13th, all about pet inclusive housing. And in fact, one of our speakers today, actually two of them will be on uh, that webcast. You can drop in any time during the morning. Well, it's from 9 a.m. to 1 p.m. Pacific time. So it'll be a little bit later in the afternoon for people across the country going to the east of us. So we do hope you'll register. There's a link that my colleague Sheila Kay is dropping in the chat, and we hope to see you there. But today we're going to learn a whole lot and hopefully come away with some good strategies. So thank you.
Thank you, Allison. And so before I hand it over to Christina, who is going to introduce our awesome dynamic presenters, it is Monday. Case of the Mondays. Everyone do a favor with me. Close your eyes and just take a big, deep breath. Let's just do a big, deep breath in. And let's just let it out, wiggle it out. We are here, drop in this time. This is your time to listen and to learn. And Christina, the floor is yours.
Thank you, thank you. All right, so today we have two great speakers from Heart LA. HEART, which stands for Housing Equity and Advocacy Resource Team, is a nonprofit based in LA that focuses on protecting people, pets, and their homes. And the org was founded on the fundamental principle that every person deserves a sustainable and inclusive place to call home. And I'll introduce our speakers with very truncated versions of their impressive bios due to timing. But if you click on the link that Allison just put on, you can read their full bios there later on. So first we have Diana Mabel Cruz Rivas. Diana is the program director and law clerk at Heart LA. She joined the org in 2020 as a paralegal, driven by her commitment to helping people secure and maintain housing with their companion animals. Diana brings a diverse background, including experience in student affairs at Occidental College, capacity building as an AmeriCorps Vista, and has a degree in sustainable environmental design from UC Davis. Outside of her role as Heart's program director, Diana enjoys creating delicious vegan meals and spending quality time with her beloved furry companions. And secondly, we have Zaira Bernal, who is a paralegal at Heart LA. Zaira joined the organization in 2023, driven by her lifelong commitment to ensuring her community has access to legal resources in their native language and through a culturally sensitive lens. In her role, she has contributed to keeping individuals and their pets housed while also expanding her impact through grant writing, public speaking, and community engagement initiatives both within and beyond the organization. Before Heart LA, Zaira was at the Eviction Defense Network and the Domestic Violence Project under the Los Angeles County Bar Association's Council for Justice. So welcome, Diana and Zaira. Take it away.
Thank you so much. I'm going to share my screen so we can get started. Let me get that set up. Share. And I think today, Diana is going to be kicking off our presentation. So,
yeah, sweet. For it to load up on my screen, but hello and good morning, everyone. We're so happy to be here. Housing is something that's deeply personal to myself, is deeply personal to Zaira. We are both paralegals in the space, so we both have that direct line to clients, right? And often we're the ones that do the correspondence, that talk to the landlords. So we have a lot of in-depth knowledge about what these issues are, personal law knowledge, right? We've both been impacted by housing insecurity in one way or another. So again, this is something that's very deeply personal to us, and it's very difficult to find anybody that hasn't been untouched by a housing struggle in one way or another, right? Whether it be yourself, a family member, a friend. So the more we can come together on these issues and really help bridge that gap, the better we'll be able to support not just people, but their furry family members as well. So next slide, please. All right, and we wouldn't be a housing justice organization if we didn't do a land acknowledgement, right? And we do this at the beginning of every presentation that we do because we are right on stolen land. The land that we're on, so we're in Los Angeles. It's a traditional, ancestral, and unceded territory of the Tongva, the Chumash, and the Kizh people. So we honor their past, present, and future stewardship of this land. So at Heart, we're committed to advancing housing justice for all. Okay, we're moving on to the next slide. All good. So who are we? What is Heart? I'll give you the spiel that I give to people when they come up to our table. So we are a nonprofit organization that provides free legal services to people that are having trouble with their housing, specifically because of their pet. But it's really wide, right? We do everything from technical assistance to eviction defense sometimes. Primarily what we do is eviction prevention. We want to prevent evictions before they happen. When we have the capacity to provide defense, we're happy to do it. But first and foremost, we are an organization that's devoted to preventing housing insecurity for people and their pets. We do a lot of advocacy where we can to make sure that people are able to access housing with their assistance animals, and we provide legal solutions. We are in conversation with our partners to break down those barriers, right? So we know a lot of them exist, and we'll get into those here. Today's agenda, right? So I'm starting this off with the first half. So we're going to talk about the Fair Housing Act, what the protections are, what people they impact, right? Then we'll go into some case studies. We're going to go deeper into what those sources of resistance are, and then we'll end up with some solutions. Okay. I saw Lucy threw in a lovely graphic, and because we come from a legal world, we kind of speak in alphabets, like an alphabet soup, right? There are a lot of terms. So I want to step back a little bit and just start with both service animals and emotional support animals are assistance animals, right? They're under this umbrella. The main difference is that service animals require training, right? So the most common example is a seeing eye dog, right? That dog is trained to perform a specific task for their person. And emotional support animals don't have to do anything at all. All they have to do is be super cute, and that's it, right? You're getting emotional support from them just existing. They don't require any training at all. So while they're both do different things, both are assistance animals and both are afforded protections by the Fair Housing Act. So what is it? So the Fair Housing Act protects people from discrimination when they're either renting, getting a mortgage, housing assistance, other housing-related activities. It prohibits discrimination in housing due to race, national origin, religion, sex, familial status, and in this case, we're going to hone in really on disabilities. So what are these protections entail? Tenants with assistance animals are protected from discrimination. That means that if a landlord is attempting to evict them because of one of these protected statuses, there's a legal defense there. This is nationwide, right? We're talking about all of the states. This is a federal protection. So no pet fees or pet deposits can be charged for these. Landlords have to provide reasonable accommodations to tenants with disabilities. And assistance animals, support animals, they're not subject to no pet policies, right? So if there's a no pet clause on a lease, I'll be really clear about this. Assistance animals are not pets. I'll dive a little deeper on that, but they're not pets. So they are not subject to no pet policies, and they're also not subject to breed or size restrictions. So what does the tenant have to do? The tenant has to provide documentation from a reliable third party, and that's all they have to do. What is a reliable third party? Often we think about the person has a primary care provider, a therapist, a counselor, a social worker, a reliable third party that knows who they are, know that they have disability, and know that they have an animal that alleviates one symptom of that disability. That can be so many people, right? And I think more and more we're trying to be really creative about who that reliable third party can be, specifically because, as we all know, access to medical services is very difficult. Not everybody has that access, and everybody deserves to be sheltered with their support animal. So there's that. And the main thing is that the animal must provide something, right? So here's an example. I struggle with anxiety and depression. My dog has to go out every day. My dog's alleviating one symptom of my depression by physically getting me out of bed, right? Because I know that he has to go out. I have to go outside. I have to have the sunshine in my face. My cat, on the other hand, he's really grumpy. He's really silly. He makes me laugh, right? He's alleviating another symptom of a disability that I have. So in that way, you can have more than one ESA for sure. And that's really what this is in a nutshell. There are a lot more nitty-gritty details, but this is just an overview for today. And a few more fast facts for y'all. Oftentimes we hear tenants say, I want to register my ESA. And what we'll say is there is no such thing as an ESA registration. There's no list, there's no registry for ESAs, right? And we want to emphasize that all you need is that letter. All you need is a letter from a reliable third party that states that they know who you are, that you have a disability, and that assistance animal alleviates a symptom of the disability. IDs and vests are not necessary. Prior to the pandemic, we were really adamant about not seeking any type of documentation from the internet, only because there are a lot of scams. But the good thing now is that telemedicine is a little more accessible. So we're not so much like, don't get that online ESA letter. I think more so we're like, be very, very weary of scams that make you, buy these extra things that you don't need. Yeah, be wary of those scams. All you need is that letter. And for us, what you should really know is that these letters don't technically expire. There's nothing in the law that says these letters expire. But we do recommend that the letters be regularly updated, because what the landlord can do, what they legally can do, is call that provider, call that person that whose information is on the letter, and just verify that they know who you are, that you have a disability, right? You can't ask details about what your disability is. But they can ask just like, do you know this person, to make sure the letter's legit. Something else, like worst case scenario, let's say we do go to trial. It is helpful to have that person come in as an expert. So not so helpful if that person practices, in a city or state that's far away, because that would, require more money and travel. But that's very worst case scenario. And in the state of California, we having disability can mean a lot of things, right? A lot of people think it's something that's visual, right? Like you might need assistance getting around, using a wheelchair. But what we tell people is that it's a lot of things, right? I mentioned anxiety, depression before. It could be cancer. And I think in our communities, especially we're in Los Angeles, we both speak Spanish. There is a cultural resistance to getting mental health in our communities. So we like to begin talking to people by explaining what definition of disability is, because it's very, very broad, and it's very likely that they might have something that they could get support with. So most local laws require pet licensing and spay neutering. People ask, hey, my landlord's asking for additional paperwork on top of what I've already submitted for my ESA. If that additional paperwork is asking you for licensing or spay neuter information, there is nothing legally that will stop them from doing that. Those are legal requirements. So for us, to the extent that we can help people get connected with those resources, the better. That is something we do like to point out. It's not necessary to essentially have an ESA, right? They don't have to be spayed neutered to have an ESA, but does the law require them to as well? Likely yes. And I'm speaking for County of LA right now. And unlike service animals that are able to go everywhere with you, emotional support animals don't have public access rights, and they're treated like pets everywhere else except for housing. Right? So people talk about transportation. Airlines, for instance, have made a lot of changes over the years. I think one too many people try to bring an ostrich on board, and they're like, no, we're going to change our rules. So those are the safe fast facts. We've gotten these from other questions in the past, and I will pass it off now to my colleague Zaira.
Thank you for the overview. So I wanted to look at case studies of ESA documentation challenges, because when we look at the Fair Housing Act, I think that there's a pretty simple understanding of what the process should be and what individuals, tenants should be able to do to be able to get the protections that are afforded to them by this federal law. But in practice, I've been here for about a year and a half working as a paralegal, which means that I do most of the client-facing work. I'm on the ground, I'm talking to tenants every day. And over again, I've seen a big barrier in just being able to get this documentation that a person needs to be able to make sure their disabilities are protected, that their housing rights are protected. So I think two people that really demonstrate that are Ismael and also Elvia. So I'm going to talk a little bit about Ismael first. He has his two support animals, Crucito and Toby. Ismael came to our organization initially because he received a notice from his landlord asking him to remove his support animals because he just didn't want pets in the unit. I think what was most interesting about Ismael is that he is located in an area and in LA County where there is a real lack of resources for him, not only for healthcare, but also just general animal welfare resources. So there was a big barrier because he came to us and he needed assistance with getting veterinary services for his pets, but also he had this big notice and he wasn't sure where to go from here. I had a chance to speak to Ismael. I kind of went through a list of trying to troubleshoot how to get him an ESA assessment so that he might be able to get a letter. But he wasn't someone who was connected to healthcare. He didn't have Medi-Cal, Spanish speaker only. And it was just very difficult for him to access care to begin with. And then on top of that, to get some sort of ESA letter was a lot for him to try to navigate. So in the end, what we did is we ended up pivoting him to an organization that was able to provide that support and connect him to an ESA letter. So that was a good outcome for Ismael. And for Elvia, we met Elvia because she had taken in two little white dogs. Mini and Luffy are their names. And she had initially brought the dogs into her home because her two children were receiving school counseling at their school, and their counselor had at one point suggested to Elvia that to treat the issues of depression that the girls were facing because of bullying that was happening in school, that it would be a good idea to have her bring emotional support dogs into the home. And Elvia did that. She adopted these two guys from the shelter, and it was a great fit. She really saw an improvement in the mood and the general behavior of her daughters, and everything was going well until her landlord realized she had two dogs, and then at that point asked her to remove the support animals. So Elvia did.
Downloading.
Oh, sorry. So Elvia did what she. Hello. Sorry.
Go
Okay?
ahead.
I'm gonna keep going. So yeah, thank you. Yeah, so Elvia did what she thought was the most logical way forward, which was she went back to the school. She talked to the school counselor and she asked if she might be able to get some sort of letter or something that said that her daughters needed these dogs for emotional support. She was very surprised because the school counselor said that she couldn't write something like that for her. And that actually, because that school counselor was part of LAUSD, they had a policy against anyone writing any sort of documentation that would be helpful to Elvia in this situation. So um, that was very frustrating, and that was a state that she came to Heart LA in. And we were able to resolve her issue, get her connected to an ESA letter through her kids' primary healthcare physician, and then we were able to resolve things from there. But I think that these two cases really illustrate some big barriers that we've seen over and over again in the work that we do. One, just being someone who is living in a marginalized community, has low income, has limited resources, makes it very difficult for that individual to be able to get an ESA letter to begin with. Two, medical providers have a big fear of liability. They have clinical policies or insurance policies that are barring them from writing these kind of letters, and that makes it difficult for the individual who is then going to that doctor to get that documentation that they need. And then there's also a failure from landlords to respect those ESA protections. So a person could jump through all these hoops getting the ESA letter that they need. They could present it to their landlord, and then the landlord will turn around and say, well, I don't really, I'm still going to deny this, basically. And it's very frustrating because it's just another hurdle that this individual has to go through just to try to keep their support animal in their home. And although we're not really going to delve into this third point, we will be having a separate presentation with a conversation with Maddie about this. So for anyone who's interested, that's coming soon as well. And I think that there's also a big, I can really see that there is that big need for an advocacy for these individuals, for legal intervention, and that we're all kind of working in conjunction with one another. We're all looking to try to keep these support animals and these dogs, cats, whatever they may be, housed with their individuals, with the people that they love. But sometimes it takes multiple organizations and communities to make sure that that can happen for everyone. So I want to talk a little bit about why we even see this resistance to begin with. First, let's talk about doctors. Let's talk about health insurance policies. One of the most I think the most traditional ways of getting an ESA letter is going to your doctor, your therapist, a counselor, and asking for an ESA letter from them. What we have seen over and over again is these big pushbacks to that kind of documentation. If, for example, if you're here in the state of California, Kaiser has a policy against writing any ESA letters for any individual that comes in for whatever reason. So if you have your healthcare insurance and you receive it through Kaiser, then you're very, very barred from being able to move forward with getting an ESA letter because you're just already out of the game basically there. And on top of that, there are doctors in general that are a little bit nervous about that liability that they might have. They believe that by writing an ESA letter that they're personally vouching for the behavior of a dog or a cat. They don't want to be liable for anything that the dog or cat might do, even though what an ESA letter really says is that this is an individual with a disability that could benefit from having an emotional support animal by their side in their home. So that's a big resistance, though, is that doctor issue. Here in California, we have a 30-day rule, which kind of undercuts the federal protections that are in place. It asks that there be a 30-day relationship between a client and a provider before that letter can be written. And across the country, there are those other kind of rules that come in place and kind of try to undercut the federal protections and just add another hurdle for that individual to try to jump through. Um, Lack of education or experience is also a big issue that we see. Doctors sometimes just don't know what it takes to write an ESA letter. They're not sure what language they need to include. They've never written one before and will just deny writing one because of that reason. And then threading this whole needle is just a lack of access to healthcare. It's just a larger issue that our community is facing, and that really leads to those gaps in documentation. So I want to talk a little bit about what kind of solutions we've been working on. Obviously, policy is always going to be the bigger um, way to change lives for individuals and help people. But right now that we're working on the ground with these folks, what we try to do is go for one of four kind of solutions. So one is self-certification. So in California, if you receive disability benefits, you can self-certify your need for an ESA, and that would be sufficient to meet the requirements from the federal for the federal laws that are in place. We also work with partners. So we have different partnerships with our community, with healthcare organizations, with other animal welfare organizations that can connect the tenants that we're working with to mental health professionals who can then issue those ESA letters. And that's one way that we've really, really seen a benefit to the community that we're with. A lot of times, people who are connected to us aren't necessarily connected to other organizations. They don't know about them, or vice versa. So having that communication between each other really helps to make sure that we're both kind of all working to fill in those gaps that people are facing. And also, we have that partnership with that healthcare organization that has been beneficial, not just because it gives a person access to get an ESA letter, but also because it gives them access to healthcare just in general. So that's also been really great. And I think that it's been a big uh, push that we've made over the past year and a half to form these partnerships and just keep looking for more avenues to be able to support tenants a little bit more and a little bit better. Outreach and education is another way that we try to tackle this issue. We have not been shy with talking directly with healthcare providers. And this is mostly beneficial for people who are seeing therapists or counselors or doctors that are working either independently or they're working with under an insurance company that doesn't have a policy barring them from writing an ESA letter. We cannot have a conversation with doctors who are under that. Those kind of restrictions, unfortunately, it's just not something that they're going to be able to break or undo. But for those individuals who are working with independent kind of healthcare providers, then we engage with them directly. We've had conversations with people, therapists and counselors who have been just kind of nervous about what their role in the whole situation is. And they sometimes aren't sure what kind of language they should have in their ESA letters. So we're always quick to provide those resources, reading material for them, ESA letter templates if they needed, there for any questions or a conversation, just to make sure that the tenant that we're helping is able to get that kind of support from their counselor or therapist when they need it. And then the last one I think is speaks to to some of the points that Diana was highlighting earlier, which was that that letter doesn't need to be written by a doctor or medical provider in general. And I think that the push for that really that I've seen comes a lot from landlords who are very particular about where they want those letters to be coming from. But the language in the Fair Housing Act actually doesn't say that it has to be a medical provider, and it just does have to be a third party that is knowledgeable enough about the disability that the individual is facing. So this has been really helpful for us, for folks who are in interim housing of some kind, are working with a caseworker who's helping them find permanent housing in another way. And in that case, we engage with those caseworkers to try to make sure that they have all the knowledge they need and are able to support further their own clients in that way. So those are kind of the four strategies that we use. It's not all encompassing for all individuals, but I think that what the work that we've done here is just making sure we keep in touch with tenants, we keep working at it, we keep searching for avenues. We're not afraid to get creative with it or find someone somewhere in the system who's able to help them with these needs that they have. And we've really seen how helpful it is for people who are facing housing insecurity, who might get, evicted from their homes, to just have this document to begin with. So we can't stress the importance of just trying to find those solutions and working in collaboration with one another to try to get those all together for everyone. So that's the end of this conversation. But I'm excited to see what are some of the questions we all have about this topic.
Zaira, so great. Thank you so much. I think especially helping people understand service animal, emotional support animal, and the distinction both like in your home, this counts. Outside may not. That might be different. That is a whole like thing. But and when you bring the housing piece of it together, and the fact of all of the challenges that people go through. The more, different senses of marginalization you experience, the more difficulties, whether that's you live in a resource desert, whether you don't speak the language, whether you're not documented, all of these different things. And we know the power of the human animal bond. And like the story you shared about, the school saying that this would be helpful to your two young girls and that she did it. And it was helpful. And that all these systems, even the teachers like, oop, I can't actually help you. I can't actually say that I told you that. And it's just another indicator, because I think all of us have experienced that in our lives, whether we've seen relatives or ourselves, like just the systems that don't work and how frustrating that is to be trying to do the right thing and just hitting wall after wall. So I really appreciate how you grounded us in that so that we can have a deeper understanding of the challenges. It's not just so easy, like go get a letter, because so often we can at intake, we can judge the people who are at intake now turning in their pet, relinquishing their pet. And there's so much more to the story. And there's so much that people do try and do before getting to that point. And I love how you say what we do is prevention. So if we can defend, we will. But like our goal here is to arm people to understand what their rights are. So thank you for what you shared. I think that was very helpful. So much so that I think the questions, you were answering them. Like your presentation was answering the questions as they were there. So I'm going to take another gander. I don't know that I saw anything that was really sticking, but we're getting more questions in the chat. So let me just take a look really quickly. I love that people are offering resources. Lucy dropped something in there for folks who are in Texas. Someone in Southern Illinois is like, do you have a referral? So like keep cross
Love
sharing because
that.
some of these things are state specific.
I have a
Let's see.
quick question while you're looking, Jose. So if let's say you are going, unfortunately, through this process and you got the ESA documentation, but your landlord refuses to acknowledge it, what are my options from there? Like, do I have to seek legal help, or do I just like show them the FSA, like what, or FA, Federal Fair Housing, FHA? So yeah, what are the options there?
Um, yeah. So a landlord really can't just outright deny and deny you from having an emotional support animal. They have to have a very specific reason for why. And what we usually do is, we step in and we advocate for people at that level. The reasonable accommodation request is what we usually send out after that, or in conjunction with that is the best practice. And that reasonable accommodation letter, right, basically just asks the landlord to please allow this emotional support animal in the home, as part of a reasonable accommodation for their disability. And it's something that should be accepted. The reasons for why a landlord can say no are very, very specific, and it has to be something like it's an undue financial burden, it's a health concern for other people in the household. And then in that stage, if the landlord is refusing it for one of those reasons, then we step in again and then we say, okay, but is there any way to mitigate these concerns that you're bringing up? If you're saying that the animal is a health concern, what are these health concerns? What are the other tenants that are being affected, and how can we mitigate and work on a strategy or some sort of solution so the animal can stay housed? But mostly, we just see the landlord in these kind of situations just deny it because they don't have any real understanding of what the Fair Housing Act says or what their role in that is supposed to be. So it's important for an individual to have the knowledge of what the Fair Housing Act says, what their recourse is, and possibly to speak with a legal organization, just so that they're aware of what their rights are and how they can best move forward in that situation. But we see over and over again that landlords really just want to deny it outright, even though that's not the process here, as put in place by these federal laws. And yeah, that's why it's important for people to be informed, to have that knowledge, so that they're not just, I guess, making these moves that are not according to what their rights are, really.
Thank you.
Yeah, and if I can add on to that, I mean, you said it, Saida, right? It's like what is reasonable and what isn't, right? The whole point of a reasonable accommodation is that it is reasonable. Like, I'm not asking you to build like a little barn outside for my chihuahua. I'm asking you to just like let me and my chihuahua like live together, right? So it's very much what is reasonable. And we see a lot, especially with like smaller mom and pop landlords that don't really know what their duties are as a landlord. We see it a lot less with like the larger
Like
management
corporate.
companies, the corporate management companies that are a little bit more in the know of what their duties are. But when that happens, we just say, go, especially if we meet somebody at the shelter that's like, my landlord told me that I couldn't have my emotional support animal, we just say, did you get a notice? No? Go home. Like, go back home. And if you can access like a free legal organization, amazing. But that's also like a very big challenge. So, like Saida mentioned, to the extent that we are able to, help people understand what their rights are and not just that, practice them. So we see a lot too is people being like, oh, I don't want to cause problems. Like, and there, of course, it's you're afraid of losing the roof over your head. When we say it's like, you've already got a problem, like they made a problem for you. So when we hear like, hey, you have a team, you've got like all of us telling this landlord what to back off and what their duties are. So a lot, a lot of that is like, so if you didn't get like a 3 notice or anything official, like, go back home with your pet. It's not real. They don't know the laws.
There are some good questions, but I had a question. I was like, since I'm the host, I'm going to ask my question. We talk about landlords, and I think a lot of times, like after these chats, I leave always just thinking like landlords, and I like have this massive like bias, right? And I am a landlord, in some ways, not in some way, in a way, and my tenant has lots of dogs. Um, I was wondering, have you ever actually like had a good experience with a landlord, someone who like after you educated them and told them, they're like, I didn't know. Can you like how like give me some hope out there in humanity?
Oh, there is. I'm in this position where I have a big bias too because I deal with them every day. So sometimes it's just that personal bias that comes to me. But I've had conversations over the phone with landlords where it's just it's difficult for me to have the conversation to begin with, but it's really just like, hey, this guy, this woman just has like, 2 little white dogs, and we're trying to kick her out. Why? Like, this is her emotional support and a letter. I think I've been working with a woman who has uh, she has cancer, and her oncologist gave her this letter so that she could have her 2 dogs and her cat with her while she like deals with this diagnosis. She lives alone. It's a big issue for her, and these pets have been really vital for her, in being able to come to senses with the diagnosis that she has and the situation. But the landlord has been very antagonistic about it. We had presented that RA letter and it was an issue. I had a phone call conversation with him and I was like, hey, here's the documentation. I sent that over to you. Have you had a chance to look through it? And more than anything, I think what I sensed was there was just a confusion about what the paperwork meant. He was a small person who was running this business on his own, so he didn't have an attorney who was looking over his documents or anyone to help him understand what it is that we had sent over in terms of the paperwork, the documentation, and the reasonable accommodation letter. So I just talked to him about what it was that those documents meant, what his responsibilities as the landlord were. And then he said, okay, sounds good. And we haven't heard anything from him since, and the rent has been accepted, and that tenant is doing fine, as fine as she can with her diagnosis, but her 2 dogs and her cat are there providing her support. So I think that those conversations are really important to have, but that door has to be open from the landlords, to begin with. And I'm not here to provide landlords advice, but it is good to have those conversations about where their questions are and what their responsibilities are. And we're here to tell them this is what the tenant rights are that you need to be following.
Yeah, we have
Yeah.
gotten like a unicorn landlord here and there that are like, hey, I love pets. I want to meet, I don't want to evict anybody. I just want to know like what I have to do. And in those cases, we're like, great. We're not in the business of helping anybody evict anybody. We're in we are very much an organization that's committed to helping people stay in their homes and access housing. So yeah, to the extent that somebody wants to learn more about what their like duties are, great. You want to evict somebody? We'll not, no, we won't be there for that.
Yeah, I love that. So there's going to be lots of questions, I imagine, in the forum. So I'm going to start with some of the ones that are a little higher up. And this one is from Kristen, who asked something relating to timing. So does the national law say anything about the timing of the letter or landlord request? Meaning, if the landlord asks you to remove the pet before you get a letter, can they insist? Or do the tenants have the right? Like, so like, what is that like, that timing between like you get a letter, like they want you evicted because of the animal, like like is there timing, is it vary from state to state? Like walk us through a little of that.
Okay, sorry, you cut out just like a little bit, but I think I caught the question, and correct me if I'm incorrect. So it was the
Okay.
question in a nutshell, Like what is the timing? Like when somebody gets a
Yeah.
letter and how
Yep.
quick?
You get a letter. How much time do they have before the landlord can actually say, like, I gave you that letter. It's been 3 weeks. I haven't got anything. You need to be out tomorrow. Like, what does that look like?
Got you. Well, so we can speak very specifically on LA County because that's where we practice. The housing laws might differ nationwide, but at least in LA County where we are, and and honestly, no, it's a process. Like you have to have a notice. You have to have a written notice, right? If it's verbal, if they just call you up and they're like, "Hey, I need you out in 3 days because like you can't have any dogs. Dogs aren't on the lease." That's not, that's not a written notice. Even if it's a text, it's not a written notice. It has to be something that is like that is written. It doesn't have to come from the court, but it's a written notice. It's like, hey, these are the violations of the lease, whatever it is, to give you time to address it, right? So in LA County, I typically what these notices are, they'll give you 3 days to cure or quit. So that is 3 days to cure, to like fix whatever the issue is, or then you risk the actual eviction process starting. So what that 3 day notice is, you're not going to be evicted in 3 days. You don't have to give up your pet in 3 days. But if there's no action taken or if there's no communication had between the landlord, um, then they can start with the process. Then they can go to the court, right? But before they go to the court and file it, they do have to give you a notice. And if they don't do that, then there's a good there's a good chance that that case will be thrown out.
Okay, great question and great answer for the timing piece. Here's an interesting question because I know, oh, is that me? Okay. I know some folks were asking, like, who can write these letters? And we've talked about it's a third party. They have to know you, the animal, like just some knowledge. But it seems like it's a little gray, right? Based on the flexibility that the law probably wants. And that's where the spirit of the law kind of comes in, right? So the question here is like, can a licensed social worker, therapist write this letter? Also, like, what about a shelter director? Like, this person's like, could a shelter director, where can shelter staff provide these letters? Like, I think a question people would be interested in. And that's also an interesting, like, if I'm a shelter worker, like, what can I do? We don't have a Heart LA in our state, in our county. So, like, what can we do? So, yeah, like, could a shelter director provide this type of letter?
Yeah, do you want to? I think we can maybe bounce off of each other. I think what we were mentioning is that more and more we want to be creative with who can write these letters because the law doesn't say that it has to be a physician. The law says that it has to be a reliable third party. So when it comes to like if you have like a caseworker, for instance, perfect, amazing, right? If it's a shelter worker, if it depends on how much they know them, right? Like how well do you know the person? How can you verify that the person has a disability? And how can you verify that the animal alleviates a symptom of the person's disability? That's all you're doing, right? That's all you're doing. And we have seen resistance to it when a landlord, when the letter doesn't come from a medical provider. Um, but again, that's not what the law says. I'll pass it to you, Zaira, if you have anything to add.
Yeah, and I think that's a big the spirit also of this conversation is that we have had these conversations with other people in the social services who are providing support to individuals who are working with veterans who aren't necessarily in the animal welfare space but are working with individuals regularly who can write these kind of letters. So I think that it's really great for anyone who can get involved to get involved, and that's why when we're having these conversations about what needs to be included in that letter, helping with that template language just so they know kind of what kind of language would be great to include in that. And yeah, like Diana said, anyone who is knowledgeable about that person's disability, about how those animals are helping them through that disability, is qualified to write that letter. Really.
That is really, before we started, everyone, I asked Saida and Diana, I was like, what's your intention? What do you want? And they said, we want people to walk away with at least one more tool, something they didn't know before. And we want people to feel empowered. And I'm like, how empowering to know that like so many of us through our foster program, our like past programs, the programs where we really do get to know people, where we can really would with confidence say, I know that this animal will be very helpful for XYZ reason. You know, Christina, I think about yourself and all your behavior knowledge, like the folks that you would feel confident if you knew that you could, but so many of us like also get wrapped up in like the liability, like, can I do that? And if you feel any of that, just have some compassion for those doctors who are kind of having a pause, right? So like we can understand where the pause might come from. And we can maybe be empowered with this information to know could this look like in our shelter, in our community? How can we start to utilize this knowledge to preserve that human animal bond and do some of the really great proactive work that Heart LA is doing? And I just, wow, I'm so inspired. Like, I'm going to tell so many people that that is their options. And so I feel inspired and I feel I have some more tools. I'd love for y'all to drop in the chat what's something maybe you learned. What is something you're feeling empowered to do with this information? But thank you both so much. And I'll hand it to you, Christina, for your final thoughts.
Yeah, it's such, I love the practical applications to this, or solutions rather, to this problem. And it's such a widespread problem, even just looking at the chat, how many people are influenced and affected by this. So thank you so much, Zaira and Diana. And Allison, there will be a link to the forum that is connected specifically to this conversation, and the speakers will spend some time there answering your questions. So I see some really good questions that we didn't have time to address. For example, the template for the ESA letter, maybe we can get that. And yeah, please join us in the forum and get your questions answered there. And thank you so much, everybody, for joining. And thank you, Jose, for co-hosting with me. And
Thank
thank
you,
you, Diana.
Christina.
Thank you, Zaida.
Gracias. You two are brilliant. We are so lucky to have your
Oh,
magic all
and
over us on a Monday.
if you enjoyed this, they will be back in Maddie's Cat Maddie, but also December 9th. They'll be back for another community conversation with us.
All right. Adios, everybody. Be good to yourself and others this
Have a
week.
great week.